Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm very honored to have this presentation today about my joint work with Euro4Europe about SMEs, perceptions and expectations of availability of external finance. We investigate this topic from a behavioral perspective. Maybe a short personal presentation. I hope you all know Euro4Europe. I'm his colleague, his PhD candidate, working at the Zeppelin University and also working at the Zeppelin University as a project coordinator for research-based learning. Well, what we're doing is kind of, or what I'm presenting today is kind of part of a larger idea, or let's call it project. We all know that limited access to credit or external financing shows negative impact on the overall real economy, and we also know that especially the small and medium-sized enterprises are affected by this constraint in access to external financing. They're disproportionately more affected than large enterprises. But what's still under investigation, for example, think of the recovery period after the financial crisis, is why these enterprises are in fact limited or constrained in accessing credit, and if they are maybe kind of self-constraining. We also know, especially in the European Union, the SMEs play a crucial role not only for the development but also in terms of labor force employed and value added. And now, in the pandemic situation, we once again have a situation where financing behavior and financing constraints can cause major problems for, of course, all firms, but as already mentioned, especially the small and medium-sized enterprises. We further know that decisions and the formation of perceptions and expectations is based on behavioral processes. You see I'm citing here the big names. And yeah, as I mentioned, in this larger project, in this larger idea, we want to investigate the financing behavior as a whole. But in this very first step, the investigation of the perception formation, how the enterprises perceive the availability of external finance, is crucial as a starting point and to find first suitable policy reactions. We know that this idea of the formation of perceptions, the influence of experiences, the influence of demand, as you will later see, is already subject to different investigations and scientific research, but we contribute in a more granular way. We rely on a data set and we have the opportunity to really investigate a granular experience base. We can investigate not only good and bad experience, but several experience categories for several external financing sources that are relevant. As a short teaser, I want to present you some small pictures about how the perception, availability perception, expectation developed over time. You can see the absolute number of firms. In the brown line is the firms that indicated decreasing or worsened perception expectation of availability of finance. The green or blue lines indicate that the firms stated they have increasing or getting better availability perception of external finance. And here I list the perception for bank financing, simple credit lines, bank overdrafts, And on the lower half of the page, I show you the perceptions for trade credits. As you've seen, the development is quite, or the perception, the perceived availability of external finance is quite stable over time. Just get back here for a second. We have 19 waves in this survey we use. The survey covers a period from, I think, 2009, starting just after the financial crisis, until the end of 2018 in our case. And you see here this, kind of stable development of an overhang of worsened perception, and then around wave 10-11 we have this change to an overhang of increasing availability perception. When we have a look at the literature, we see it's quite common ground, I think, in economics, that perceptions and decisions are based upon some behavioral factors and not only the classical hard financial factors. For example, Friedman and Kammerer found that perception and decisions, over extrapolation, personal history, which is similar to experience, are especially in the area of corporate finance interlinked with one another. Which is quite interesting, as one might suppose that in corporate finance the firms rely on data, but especially in the case of small and medium-sized enterprises, the acting managers, they do not have the capabilities to only rely on financial data. They have to rely on other sources of information, and we know that experience, former personal history, could be such a source of information. Literature also suggests or shows that in evaluating something that happened, subjects, agents overweight experience, while when actually taking this decision, they quite underweight the experience. However, there's also literature that discovers, Courbillon, that discover a significant positive correlation between what happened in the past, recent values, and when forecast on future economic development in a firm. Now we have to embed this literature and this idea into some theoretical background, why the experience is such a driver for the formation of perceptions and expectations. And we assume that loss aversion is one reason. If the firm already experienced something negative, it keeps in mind, I had to invest some time, I had to invest some money, and I do not want to experience this loss again. Another theoretical part that comes in mind, especially when considering the demand for an external financing source, is the rational inattention. As already mentioned, the managers, the people do not have, we all have limited information processing capabilities, and so the managers only start to gather information and to get the whole picture when they are really affected of something. That's why we assume that the demand or changing demand, increasing, decreasing demand, in fact affects the formation of the past perception or the future-oriented expectation. So in this very first part of our ideas, our project, we assume three hypotheses. First, of course, we assume former experience to be a major driver. Second, we assume, because of this loss aversion, quite stronger effects for negative experience than for positive experience. We assume that there's some kind of asymmetry And third, we assume that a changing demand for a specific source of external finance will cause some effect on the formation of the expectation. The data we use is gathered from the survey on the access to finance of enterprises. We got this data by the ECB. It's a semi-annually survey conducted by the ECB and the European Commission. We use data from wave 11, which is the year 2014 until wave 19. The major justification for this the split in the sample is that there were quite enormous reformulations in the questionnaire between wave 10 and wave 11, which would, although the period, of course, from 2009 to 2013 is very interesting, the analysis would have been very, very hard and not that good in an econometrical sense if we would also rely on this older data. We further restricted our sample by using only data from the Euro 15 countries, because we wanted a country sample that was entirely part of the Euro area throughout the whole period we investigate, so that there's a certain kind of experience with the currency the managers or the SMEs already have. So our sample makes up a number of 100,000 observations from 48,000 firms in these 15 countries. Simple overview. You see, of course, the big four countries have the most data points. Here we see that the perception expectation is quite heterogeneous across these countries. We, for example, see that, which is quite obvious, in Greece, the perception and the expectations were quite negative throughout the time. We see that, where was it? Spain had quite positive perceptions and expectations. We see sometimes that the perceptions and the expectations are quite similar, for example, in Spain, but we also see that, which I'm allowed to say it as I'm a German, this is a quite German topic. We perceive the past better and the future a bit worse. There's a kind of a difference here. All in all, we have a quite heterogeneous sample. So our main variable of interest is whether the perception, expectation, past-oriented perception, future-oriented expectation. The question was, how do you perceive it in the past 6 months? How do you think it will be in the coming 6 months? We are interested in whether this variable of interest improved or deteriorated. However, the variable had 4 categories at first sight: improved, stayed the same, deteriorated, or the financing instrument is not applicable. And I think in this case, where firms can also answer something like, yeah, interesting, but for me, I cannot use this instrument. Some sample selection correction is a quite straightforward approach. And here we used the starter hack probit sample selection. We, in the first step, we used the instrument not applicable as our selection criterion, and then executed the second step equation as also as a binary response model. For the sake of our model, we dropped the middle categories, stayed the same, because we were or we are majorly interested in some changes in the perception. However, in our robustness test, I will later show you a table where we included this middle category, and in fact it does not change our results in a significant way. So our first equation, the selection equation, follows the following approach. We tested whether the main variable is whether the firm applied for the external source of financing, because of course if the instrument is not applicable anymore, one can assume that the former application is that there's some connection. We have a vector of control variables including firm size and firm age, where the age is our unique variable in the selection equation, because it's quite important to have this at least one unique variable in the selection equation. And we also include country and time effects, of course, in this first step as well. We then perform Wald tests, testing whether the equations are independent or not, and the null hypothesis of no correlation or some independent equation in our sample can be rejected. For most of the estimations, I think there are only two for which we cannot reject the hypothesis. So in fact there is a sample selection bias which we have to tackle with our two-step estimation approach. Then in the second equation we use the former experience as a regressor. We use the change in need as regressor. We also include some control variables. Again, the firm size. Quite important here, we use the firm size in terms of employees, not in terms of turnover. We used whether the firm relies on other kind of exotic sources of financing, like crowdfunding or whatever is possible in the internet nowadays. And of course we also include, again, country and time effects. We reported country clustered standard errors and the average marginal effects. For a better overview, I left out the clustered standard errors. I just put the classical stars in there. And here we have the results now for the bank loan. I think it's regarding the experience quite as expected. If the firm was rejected by the bank, we have a huge marginal effect of minus 0.59. That the perception will be worse or will be decreasing. On the other hand, if the firm received everything or did not even apply because it has enough internal funds, the availability perception for bank loans will be increasing, will be improved. When we have a look at the expectation, the future-oriented part of our analysis, the results are quite the same. We see that negative experience exert a strong influence, a strong negative influence, while positive experiences exert a positive influence, but kind of a weak one, and especially this variable, it received everything, shows no significance in the case of the bank loans. Quite interesting when we compare the results later on is the result for need. If the need for a bank loan decreases, this is associated with a positive parameter value for which means the perception as well as the expectation is increasing in this case. In the second table, we investigate the results for credit lines. From an institutional perspective, credit lines are also offered by banks at the same institution as bank loans, so there are no big differences, obviously. So we can switch to the third table, the trade credits. Trade credits are the credits the trade partners offer. Firms need some time. Okay, I will hurry up now to the comparison, the results in a nutshell. Two things we can investigate. First of all, there seems to be an institutional difference between bank loans and trade credits. We see the asymmetry, the loss aversion, is quite strong for the bank-based financing. There we see the strong parameters for negative experiences, while for the trade credits the parameters are much weaker. And in fact, for the need, the demand, we can see some differences. A decreasing demand or an increasing demand for bank loans leads to more negative perception of the availability of bank-based financing, while increasing demand for trade credits is associated with a more positive evaluation of the trade credits. This is quite interesting and might say something about the structure and the complexity of this external financing sources. I will skip some slides here. The robustness analysis, just quite quickly. Wait. We conduct 3 different robustness approaches. First of all, ordered probit regressions, then a country split into Northern and Southern European countries, and a country split based on Laporta's classification into the legal origins. There's some overlapping between Southern European countries and French legal origin. In general, we can say that in these countries, the experience tends to show higher parameters or stronger influence on the evaluation than in the Northern European countries or the countries of German legal origin. Yeah, finally, some first conclusion, or the conclusions of this first analysis, is that experience exerts or is a source of information for evaluating availability of finance, and thinking into the future, into future research, might be a source of information for making financial decisions. We also see that this effect is not only past-oriented or existent in the past perception, but also transmitted into the future. And we see, at least within the bank-based financing, that there is some certain kind of loss aversion. We also find some evidence suggesting that rational inattention comes also into play when evaluating the availability of finance. And for a policy perspective, and I think that's quite important right at the moment when we're talking about Corona and the recovery afterwards, if the firms experience a longer phase of negative or they have a longer phase of negative experiences. Hello. there might be some transmission of this negative experience into the future. So policymakers should be aware of this. Thank you very much, and now I'm looking forward to discussion and some suggestions.